You're watching The Ready Writer, a show where I get to speak to writers of all different genres, mediums, and experiences. The Ready Writer. Are you ready?
Welcome to The Ready Writer. Today's guest is Maria Riegger. Maria Riegger shares with us her journey in becoming an author, and she discusses her day work as a lawyer. The first question that was asked was, when did she discover her joy of writing?
I was about 12 years old when I started writing short stories, and I enjoyed it. I was always a daydreamer. I was still am constantly daydreaming. When I was bored as a kid, now in meetings at work, sometimes start to daydream. And I would make up, daydream about really sometimes elaborate things, sometimes only scenes, and sometimes these elaborate stories, right? So at some point I had my head was full of these stories that I started to write. So that I was about 12 or 13 when I started writing consistently, putting things down, and creating works with actual, beginning, middle, and end. So short stories, and then novellas, and then as an adult graduated to novel length books.
The next question that was asked Maria was, when did she realize she wanted to become an author?
I was in law school in my early 30s, and I was having a good time in law school, learning a lot, meeting a lot of people, but it didn't give me the creative outlet that I wanted. That was a product of my daydreaming. So I had a lot of stories, I had enough in my head that I thought this is enough for a book or a series. So that's why I started writing them down, and I decided I had enough to actually create a book or a series, and I made the decision to self-publish. So I was, in my early 30s when I decided I really wanted to dedicate myself to this, or if not full-time yet, at least part-time, and then eventually full-time.
Maria decided to become an author while she was working as a lawyer. She shares with us why she chose to become a lawyer.
I spent a lot of my 20s traveling, living overseas, having experiences, finding out what I liked, what I didn't like. And I went to business school thinking, well, this would be a good stepping stone to making more money and having the financial independence that I want, so I don't have to have a 9-to-5 job till I'm in my 60s, right? So, and in going to business school, when I took the business law classes, I really enjoyed those. So practicing law fits with a lot of my skill set, my interests. I don't litigate. I like to get lost in the details. I like transactional stuff. I like money. I'm big into personal finance. So it's a better fit for me than business school. So I left business school to do law school. And I don't regret that at all. I really enjoy practicing law, but it's, as I said, it doesn't always fulfill that creative side, right? So when I write, I'm in charge of the story. I'm in charge of where it goes, how to structure it, that kind of thing.
Traveling is known as the best form of education. Maria shares how she was introduced to traveling and the lifelong benefits.
We traveled a lot with my parents as kids because I have family overseas. And I went, as you said, I went right to college from high school. And then after college, I was lucky enough to get a job working overseas, first in France and then in Spain. And I took that opportunity to stay for years in Europe and travel around, live in different places, and just have those different experiences. So I'm a parent, and I tell other parents, educating kids is much more than what they learn in school. It's the experience of other cultures, other ways of doing things, other points of view, and learning that there's this whole big world out there with these experiences that you can have, right? It's not just your microcosm of your, where you live and go to school or work the day to day. So, but I always had the drive to learn and have experiences. And that's kind of what motivated me to travel, live overseas. So even if, I didn't know anybody when I moved there, it's better to do that when you're younger because it's easier to make friends, I think. So, but I always had that lifelong drive and curiosity to learn about stuff, including different cultures. So I was just very motivated to do that.
After deciding to publish her first book, Maria shares her fears and hesitations and how she conquered them.
It's hard putting yourself out there because there's always going to be critics. There are going to be people that don't like your writing or your writing style or your stories. And I think you have to accept that and know that the people that like your work will find it and take solace in the praise you get from the people that actually like your stuff, your fans, right? And so it's hard. You have to kind of just, I don't want to say get over it, but you have to find a way not to take some of the criticism personally, because like I don't like every single thing I read, right? I'm not going to post bad reviews necessarily, but I don't necessarily like everything I read. So you're not going to like everything you read. Not everybody's going to like your work. And you have to kind of accept that and not let that stop you from putting it out there. And I've spoken to other authors and kind of local authors groups. And I told them, look, if you take any really famous author today, James Patterson or Stephen King, and you look at Goodreads or Amazon, they're going to have 1 and 2 star reviews too, right? They're not going to have a perfect 5.0 review for the thousands and tens of thousands of reviews that they have. So not everybody's going to like their stuff, or not everybody's going to like certain works that they published. And, obviously that doesn't bother them. They're still successful. So that's kind of what I tell newer authors is don't let that stop you, because even these really well-known, well-respected authors who are really good at practicing their craft, even they have 1-star reviews.
After conquering her fear, Maria shares how she started the process of publishing her books.
A lot of just learning on my own and making mistakes and baptism by fire. I just did a lot of online research, and I talked to people who worked in the publishing industry. As you know, there's so much information available online. Eventually, I found out who the reputable sources were as far as traditional publishing, self-publishing, getting an agent, all that stuff. And I looked there, and I, ignored the rest of the stuff. But it was some trial and error. I had to figure out, how to get an ISBN and how to do this and how to find an editor, right? Because I'm not going to edit my own stuff because you're always going to, my opinion is you're always going to miss stuff. It's best to hire somebody to do that, copy edit. I did that. And for my first book, it took a long time and a lot of just learning as I went, right? But I was determined to do it. And I told myself, you're going to make mistakes, but we can fix them for the next book or go back. I redid the covers for my first 2 books I published so that they were more consistent with the genre, right? So things like that. So, it's a lot of learning as you go, and you got to be prepared for that and to make mistakes. But there are a lot of good resources from like readsy.com to local publishing groups. I live outside of Washington, D.C., and there's a local meetup group run by a pretty well-known, he started as a self-published author, then became a traditionally published author, and he and his wife, who used to work on publishing, run this free meetup group where they give seminars on this stuff. So take advantage of all those opportunities. You can get a lot of help for free. So that would be my recommendation to people starting out on the self-publishing journey. Just take advantage of those resources.
After conquering her fear, Maria shares how she started the process of publishing her books. She also discusses what was challenging about the publishing process.
Letting go of perfectionism. And I want to say it's very important to me, should be to all self-published authors, to put a very high quality product out. But you can be changing and tinkering with the manuscript like forever, infinitely, right? So at some point, you have to just recognize that the manuscript is done and needs to go to editing. And usually that point is when I'm changing things back to where they were before, like I'm going to use this word, but I've made this change already. Now I'm going to change it back. That's kind of a good indication to me, like, okay, now you're just kind of procrastinating, right? Because you're paranoid about mistakes. At some point, you have to recognize that manuscript is ready to go, or should be ready to go, at least for editing. So, and I talk to a lot of people because I speak on a lot of parenting related topics for parents. And one of the things I speak about is procrastination due to perfectionism. Like this idea, like if it's not absolutely perfect, I'm just not going to do it. There's no point. But then, things just won't get done, or creative projects won't get completed if that's what's happening. So I think that's, well, you have to balance that with, as we said, putting out a really high quality book. You also have to recognize that you can make revisions indefinitely. So at some point, if you're serious about publishing it, you're going to have to make the determination that it's ready to go.
Maria Riegger discusses her latest book, the synopsis and inspiration behind the book.
So my latest novel is called Lone Wolf, and it is a second chance romance, romantic suspense kind of action adventure. So the main character is a reclusive author who is also a psychic, and in the novel, she's actually the rescuer of the former partner, the man. So it kind of inverts the that rescuer kind of theme or trope. So I draw a lot on my own kind of tough childhood experiences for the backstory of the main character. So in that sense, it's a personal book. It's taken me, it's work of fiction, but it's taken me probably longer than I should have to finish the manuscript, probably because it was very personal. I draw really personal themes, but I also like writing action adventure. It's just fun. So it's a fun book to write as well.
Well, you just answered my next question. What was the inspiration behind you writing the book?
Right. I like to tell a good story. Number one, I just like to tell a good story, and a story that's going to make the reader keep reading, right? That's going to compel the reader to keep reading. So that's the basic stuff. And then from there, I always like to bring in some kind of important themes, right? So redemption, or moving on after hardship, or healing from really bad trauma. I mean, nobody's perfect, and I personally like reading about characters who are not perfect, but who are trying. Because when I read a romance, sometimes that's meant to be fluffy, and that's fine, right? No, nothing wrong with that. But when I read some books where the main characters are absolutely perfect with no flaws, I think it's great to read as just for fun, but it doesn't reflect real life, right? We're all flawed and we're all trying, and I like to read about characters who have those kind of similar experiences. Yeah. So all my main characters are people like that. Kind of, they're trying. They have a good heart, but they have a lot of flaws to overcome. And that's part of the story.
Maria shares some insight for aspiring authors wanting to publish their first book.
If they have a book idea and they're hesitant, so if it's a nonfiction book, I'll put my attorney hat on and I'll say things like, be careful about possible defamation, things like that. So I've spoken on those topics, and those questions always come up. So, but if it's a fiction book, I'd say, look, is it a good story? Do you feel like it's a good story people would want to read about? Then just write. And if you're not sure, about the structure of the book, of the story yet, or you're not sure where the story is going to end up, that's okay. Many authors don't know exactly how the story is going to go until you write, right? So that's what I would recommend. Like if you feel like it's a good story, you don't have it necessarily 100% fleshed out, just write stories, or even notes. You can do an extended outline, and in the process of writing, sometimes ideas will come to you, inspiration will come to you, and the work has the potential to take on a life of its own. So yeah, as long as you think it's a good story, I would say go ahead and start writing and see where it takes you.
So a question just came to my mind. Would you suggest someone who has finished writing their book copyright it legally before getting beta readers?
Oh, to copyright it before getting beta readers?
Right.
So when you copyright, I'm going to back up for a second. I want to make clear that when you create a work, such as a book, you have copyright over it just by virtue of creating it before registering it with the Copyright Office. So that's your copyright. It is advisable to register with the U.S. Copyright Office because you get statutory protection should you ever have to file a copyright infringement suit. I just want to make that clear because it's a point of confusion that I get asked about a lot. So it has to be, to register with a Copyright Office, it has to be a finished work. So it's got to be finished. That means it's got to go to beta readers first, then go to the beta readers first. Yeah, do that process before registering it with the Copyright Office because it's got to be a finished product.
Lastly, Maria was asked which authors, one dead and one alive, she would enjoy lunch and conversation with.
Gosh. Okay, so the one who has passed on will be Ray Bradbury. And I would ask him his secrets about being so prolific. I would ask him about the inspiration for his books, especially Fahrenheit 451 is one of my personal favorites. And his secrets for living such a long life. So that's the first part. The second part, that's tough. It's currently living. Okay, I'm gonna go with Stephen King. I've been reading his books since I was my son's age. He was 14, and my son is also a big horror fan, like Stephen King. And I'm so curious about his inspiration for some of his books. And I've read his memoir on writing, and he actually spoke at my university when I was there. And he's just a really interesting person. So I would have a lot of questions and things to talk about with him.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Ready Writer. We thank our guest, Maria Riegger, and we thank you, the viewer, for taking the time to watch this episode.